Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to sift through, well, just the huge amount of information out there and bring you the clearest insights from recent research. Even years after COVID-19 first hit, it still feels incredibly complicated. There's always something new, discoveries, challenges. So our mission today, really, is to dig into a pile of recent sources and pull out the most important bits. Think of it as a shortcut to getting properly up to speed on where things stand with COVID-19, its impacts, and where the science is going.
Exactly. And it's going to be quite a journey. I think we'll be connecting some dots you might not have thought about before. We're looking at everything from, the big picture societal stuff and health system impacts right down to specifics like myocarditis, treatments that are working, and what's happening with vaccines globally, and maybe some surprising shifts there too.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive in. First, just thinking about the sheer scale of it all, our sources mention something like 15 million excess deaths globally and just unprecedented pressure on healthcare. It really wasn't just the virus itself, was it? It was how it pushed systems to their absolute limit.
That's right. And the ripple effect beyond the immediate sickness is, well, it's fascinating when you look closely. Take the UK's NHS, for instance. They had to completely reorganize, move staff around, even set up those temporary Nightingale hospitals. Just massive changes to cope. And here's something interesting, maybe even counterintuitive from the data. UK healthcare workers, despite being right there on the front lines, didn't initially have a higher death rate than other people their age and sex.
Really? That is surprising, given the exposure levels.
It is. It suggests factors beyond just exposure, where play PPE, maybe demographics of the workforce, the whole public health response. It's complex.
Did the sources dig into why that might be? Any specific theories?
Not in exhaustive detail for the UK specifically, but they definitely point towards the importance of things like protective equipment being available, robust infection control, maybe even the generally younger age profile of many healthcare workers compared to the most vulnerable groups in the general population. It really hammers home that a multi-layered defense was key.
Okay. And beyond the hospitals, you mentioned ripple effects. I saw our sources talking about routine health services getting hit hard, especially things like childhood immunizations. That sounds like a sort of secondary crisis.
It really does raise that question about unintended consequences, doesn't it? There's a stark parallel drawn with the 2014-15 Ebola outbreak. Back then, more people died from things like measles, malaria, HIV/AIDS because the health systems broke down than from Ebola itself. And during COVID, a benefit-risk analysis in Africa suggested that for every potential COVID death linked to someone visiting a vaccine clinic, you could potentially save 84 children from diseases like measles just by keeping those routine jabs going.
Wow. 84 to 1.
Yeah. And groups like the Indian Academy of Pediatrics were strongly emphasizing, the benefits of routine vaccines far outweigh the risks, even during the pandemic peaks. Keep the schedule.
That really underscores the incredibly difficult decisions public health leaders had to make. Almost impossible choices sometimes. So, shifting to who was most affected, the epidemiology. What did the sources tell us about risk factors? Who bore the brunt?
Well, the data showed pretty clear disparities. Older people, definitely. Males seem to fare worse than females. People from Black and Asian ethnic backgrounds, and those living in more deprived urban areas also faced higher mortality rates.
And age was a big one.
Huge. The biggest disparity, really. Patients over 80 were something like 70 times more likely to die than those under 40. And obesity, that was another significant factor. A meta-analysis found that people with a BMI over 25 were much more likely to need advanced breathing support, end up critically ill, and sadly more likely to die.
Okay. Now, one complication that got a lot of attention was myocarditis, heart muscle inflammation. Our sources suggest it's not quite that simple, though, that there are different ways it presents in relation to SARS-CoV-2.
That's exactly right. It's crucial to differentiate. The sources really break it down into four main scenarios or presentations. First, you've got myocarditis linked directly to the acute COVID-19 infection itself. This can range from pretty mild symptoms all the way to fulminant myocarditis, which is very serious. But the actual prevalence seems lower than initial reports of general heart injury suggested, maybe around 1.2% to 7.2% in hearts examined after death. It could be the virus directly attacking or the body's immune response causing it.
Okay, so that's during the active infection. What else?
Second is in the context of post-acute COVID-19 syndrome, or what most people call long COVID. So symptoms dragging on for more than 4 weeks. Here, cardiac MRI scans have sometimes picked up signs of, let's say, subclinical heart inflammation, and about 8% to maybe 27% of people who have recovered. Even those who only had mild COVID initially. But the tricky part is figuring out what that means clinically if there aren't other signs, like elevated heart enzymes or the heart not pumping well. Often, its significance is a bit unclear.
Right, so lingering inflammation, but maybe not causing immediate problems for everyone.
Potentially, yes. A third type is linked to multisystem inflammatory syndrome. You hear it called MISC in kids, MIS in adults. This is that hyperinflammatory reaction that can pop up weeks after the infection, often when the person seems to be getting better. Myocarditis is actually quite common here, maybe 30% of adult MIS cases, up to 17% in children. These patients are often very unwell, needing intensive care.
Okay, that sounds serious. And the fourth type?
The fourth is vaccination-associated myocarditis. This is the one that's been discussed a lot. It's considered a rare side effect, seen mostly after the second dose of mRNA vaccines, and particularly in younger men. The figures vary, but examples cited were around 24 cases per million second doses for 18 to 29-year-old men in the U.S., maybe higher in places like Israel, up to 100 per million. Typically, it shows up as chest pain a couple of days after the jab, but and this is really important, the sources emphasize it usually has a very benign course. Most people recover fully within days.
That distinction is absolutely vital, especially differentiating the vaccine-related type from the others in terms of outcome. So how does treatment differ across these types? It sounds like it would have to be quite tailored.
It really does. For myocarditis during acute COVID, you might use COVID-specific treatments, antivirals like remdesivir, steroids, maybe IVG, that's intravenous immunoglobulin if it's very severe. For mid-IS, it's often supportive care, plus things like aspirin, IVG, and steroids to calm that inflammation down. And for the vaccine-associated type, because it's usually mild, it often just needs anti-inflammatories like NSAIDs, ibuprofen, for example, or colchicine, sometimes steroids, very rarely IVG. The CDC and others really stress that clinically significant myocarditis overall is very uncommon, and the vaccine-related cases are typically mild and resolve quickly.
Okay, that's helpful context. Let's switch gears a bit to treatments for severe COVID pneumonia. What did we learn works? Any clear winners emerging from the trials?
Definitely. A couple of key strategies stood out. Reducing the overactive immune response and stopping the virus from replicating. So dexamethasone, the steroid, that was a big one, showed a clear reduction in deaths for hospitalized patients on ventilators or just oxygen. It became standard care pretty quickly for severe cases.
Right, I remember that news.
Then remdesivir, the antiviral. It helped people recover faster if they were hospitalized and needed oxygen. And interestingly, its effect seemed to be boosted when used with berdacinib, which also independently showed it could reduce the chances of patients needing ventilation or dying.
So combination therapy playing a role there.
Yes. And also the IL-6 receptor blockers, drugs like tocilizumab and sirolimus. These are monoclonal antibodies. Given early to critically ill patients, they also improved outcomes, lower mortality, less need for ventilation. Timing seemed key there.
So those are the successes. But we also heard a lot about other drugs early on, things that didn't pan out.
Right. Big trials like the recovery study were crucial here. They found no real benefit from lopinavir-ritonavir, which is an HIV drug.
Yeah.
No benefit from hydroxychloroquine, despite all the initial buzz. Same for azithromycin, the antibiotic, and even convalescent plasma. So those are generally not recommended now.
Good to have that clarified. Now, thinking bigger picture global strategies, the WHO figures on vaccination were pretty staggering.
They really were. 12 billion doses given globally by mid-2022. That's estimated to have prevented almost 20 million deaths just in 2021 alone.
An incredible achievement in such a short time.
Absolutely. And vaccine supply, which was a huge issue early on, is now largely abundant. But challenges remain. Vaccine equity is still a major one. In lower-income countries, only about a quarter of older, more vulnerable people had even received their initial doses by that time.
So the doses are there, but getting them into arms everywhere is still tough.
Exactly. Maintaining momentum, tackling vaccine hesitancy or lower demand, and figuring out how to integrate COVID jabs into routine health care, especially for adults. Those are the ongoing priorities. The WHO's updated strategy really focuses on two things. Keep using the current vaccines effectively to cut deaths and severe illness, and simultaneously push hard to develop better vaccines, ones that give longer-lasting, broader protection, and hopefully do more to reduce transmission too.
That leads us perfectly into the future of vaccines. And this is where our sources flagged a really significant, maybe even startling development in the U.S. Despite mRNA vaccines being so central to the pandemic response, the U.S. government seems to be, well, changing course on funding their development.
Yes, this is quite a major policy shift that was reported. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, announced plans to essentially wind down the mRNA vaccine development work funded through BARDA. That's the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. It affects something like 22 ongoing projects worth around $500 million. And crucially, no new BARDA funding for mRNA vaccine projects.
Wow, $500 million. What reason did HHS give for such a big change?
Well, the statement attributed to the HHS secretary cited data indicating that these vaccines fail to protect effectively against upper respiratory infections like COVID and flu. That was a key part of their rationale. They also mentioned concerns about long-term effects and safety of the mRNA technology itself. The statement included phrasing like, "Until we can prove that mRNA technology is safe and effective, we have to focus on other platforms."
Hmm.
And they specifically referenced a Senate report related to myocarditis risks.
Okay, so concerns about effectiveness against infection, not just severe disease, and lingering safety questions, particularly myocarditis. If they're pulling back from mRNA, where are they saying they'll focus instead? What are these other platforms?
They talked about investing in what they called safer, broader vaccine platforms. Examples given included vaccines using whole viruses and also some undisclosed novel platforms. They pointed to initiatives like Generation Gold Standard as part of this new direction.
It's certainly a strong statement and a clear policy change, but I recall our sources presented other viewpoints on this too. What was the counter perspective?
Absolutely, there was significant pushback highlighted. Experts like Jeff Collar, who's a leading RNA biologist at Johns Hopkins, strongly disagreed. He was quoted saying things like, "The science is clear, mRNA medicines are safe and highly effective." He voiced concern that this decision could essentially hand over America's edge in biotech to other countries that are doubling down on mRNA research. He warned it could make U.S. patients reliant on foreign medical innovation down the line.
A warning about losing technological leadership, then.
Precisely. And it's also important context, which the sources noted, that while myocarditis is a recognized rare side effect of mRNA vaccines, getting COVID itself carries a higher risk of developing myocarditis than getting the vaccine does. That risk-benefit balance is key. Plus, the underlying science for mRNA isn't brand new. Research goes way back to the 1960s, long before COVID.
That adds really important context. It's clearly a decision with complex layers and potentially big consequences for future vaccine work. What about other vaccine types that are already out there, like Novavax? That's not mRNA, right?
Correct. The Novavax vaccine uses a different approach. It's protein-based. It recently got a CDC recommendation for an additional dose for older adults, 65 and up. Reports indicate it generates broad immune responses against different variants and generally has a favorable side effect profile. Though it's worth noting, myocarditis and pericarditis are still listed as rare potential side effects for Novavax 2, similar to the mRNA vaccines. It seems to be a rare risk associated with stimulating the immune system against this particular virus spike protein, regardless of the platform.
Okay, well, that was certainly a deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the huge global shockwaves of the pandemic to the very specific ways it can affect the heart, the treatments that emerge, the vaccine rollouts, and now these really current policy debates about the future direction of vaccine tech.
We really have. It's striking how much progress was made so quickly. Treatments, vaccines developed at unprecedented speed. Truly remarkable. But it's also clear just how complex this all remains. Understanding the finer points, like the different types of myocarditis or the pros and cons debated around vaccine technologies, is still so important.
So, wrapping this up, what's the main takeaway for you, the listener, from all this?
I think the biggest thing is that this landscape managing COVID, preventing it, is constantly evolving. We're still learning. We have effective tools now, great treatments, amazing vaccines. But new variants emerge, new research comes out, new technologies are developed. It's dynamic. And as we saw with the vaccine funding discussion, public health decisions, even really scientific ones, are also influenced by policy choices, by economics, by broader societal factors.
That definitely leaves us with something to think about. Here's a final thought, perhaps. As the science keeps racing ahead and global health policies shift sometimes quite dramatically, how do we make sure we stay agile? How do we, as individuals and societies, stay grounded in the best available evidence, especially when promising new approaches, like mRNA technology, can suddenly face these changing political or policy headwinds? How do we navigate that tension between proven safety and the potential of future innovation in a world that keeps changing?